And the Wombles of Wimbledon Common to spread their environmental message at COP26. Hello there and welcome to the UK's only daily climate news show, where we track the changes happening to our world right now and we challenge those who are coming up with the solutions. Now, in 2015, leaders and scientists from around the world gathered to sign the Paris Agreement. And since then, there has been a 76% reduction in proposed coal power construction. That's according to a new report by climate group E3G. And with the consumption of thermal coal power generation, now that is thought to account for a fifth of the world's greenhouse gas emissions, the COP26 climate summit will hope to continue that trend. So let's take a closer look now at the research. Well, there has been a huge reduction in proposed coal power, 76% since the negotiation of that Paris Agreement in 2015. The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has called for no new coal by 2021, which 42 countries are the ones you can see here in dark blue. They have already committed to that, including the UK, with a further 41, including the United States, now in a position to commit to no new coal plans after cancelling power plants that were previously planned. But these 37 countries are pressing ahead with constructing new coal projects. But it's mainly just these 6 countries. They're responsible for 82% of the remaining global pipeline of pre-construction projects, with China accounting for more than half of that total. Well, we can get more now on this from Sky's Europe correspondent, Michelle Clifford. Evening, Michelle. It's pretty clear that summits can have a big impact, but you can really see the importance of getting those big countries like China on board.
Yeah, very much so, and that is going to be the big challenge. But let's look at the positive to start. The report does make for positive reading. Many nations going in the right direction on this issue. As you mentioned, something like 3/4 of future coal projects actually scrapped since the Paris Climate Agreement. And of course, this report comes at a very important point ahead of the COP26 climate change conference. The president of that conference, Alok Sharma, had said that he wants to consign coal to the past. But at that conference, they are going to be looking at what the big issues are, or where the big issues are. And you mentioned China responsible for over 50% of future coal projects. In fact, the report says, as you mentioned, if 6 countries, China, India, Vietnam, Indonesia, Turkey and Bangladesh, scrapped their future coal projects, that would account for over 80% of future plans. So clearly significant. And the reason why it is incredibly important is because, of course, coal is one of the biggest emitters of carbon emissions. And there is this pledge to stop the rise in global temperatures in the future. But I should add that the EU itself needs to look inside many countries. Sky News in recent months has been to Germany, where there's a massive construction of a coal project affecting homes and villages. Sky also went to Poland, heavily reliant on coal too. So there is a global issue, but the European Union certainly has issues to look at, and I'm sure they're going to be addressed at the COP26 conference.
Yeah, the stakes are high, aren't they? Michelle, thank you. Well, let's have a look now at our data dashboard and the real-time power mix between renewables and fossil fuel energy in this country right now. Well, as you can see, renewables there coming in at 27%, and fossil fuels, including, of course, coal, is at 56%. Further down that dashboard, this is the CO2 emissions globally, which, as you can see, is ticking up all the time as we speak, and of course getting us ever closer to the global temperature rise of 1.5 degrees. Well, we'll be discussing what role fossil fuels will play in our future on our daily climate show debate, and tonight I am joined by Fatima Ibrahim, co-founder of Green New Deal UK, and Bob Ward from the Grantham Research Institute on Climate Change and the Environment. That is coming up for you in just a few moments. And in some of today's other climate news now, and Norway's Conservative Prime Minister Erna Solberg has conceded defeat after a general election campaign that was dominated by climate change. The Labour Party is now in coalition talks with as many as 5 other parties. And negotiations could have a major impact in Western Europe's largest oil and gas producer, with the Socialist Left and Greens both opposing further exploration, and Labour believing a withdrawal from oil and gas production should be gradual. Well, there's been more extreme weather today. Heavy rainfall, look at this, across London caused severe delays. Cars and buses struggled to cross London Bridge, and some tube lines were closed as well. The Met Office has issued a yellow warning for most of England, saying the Midlands and North East may see as much as 70 millimetres of rain today. Earlier this year, an IPCC report on climate change said that human influence has likely increased the frequency of extreme weather events, including flooding. And lab-grown woolly mammoths could be in the Arctic within 6 years. Geneticists have already used gene-editing technology to splice frozen woolly mammoth genes into the DNA of skin cells from an Asian elephant. And they plan to create a genetically modified elephant-mammoth hybrid grown in an artificial womb in a laboratory. And scientists say that bringing back the mammoth could revitalise Arctic grasslands, slow the melting of permafrost and increase natural carbon capture. And neatly segueing from woolly mammoths to the Wombles of Wimbledon Common now. And the children's TV characters and eco-warriors, don't forget, from the 1970s are being given a 21st century revamp as part of the Together for Our Planet campaign ahead of the COP26 climate summit. And Sky's Katie Spencer has more.
Underground, overground, wombling free. The Wombles of Wimbledon Common are we.
They were the original eco-warriors.
Things that the everyday folks leave behind.
Not only have the Wombles had a somewhat questionable CGI makeover, they've also been given an important new job: making the nation aware of how to be greener ahead of COP26, part of a government initiative ahead of November's landmark climate summit.
Of course, for those of a certain age, fond memories of Wimbledon Common come flooding back. But what about those who don't remember Uncle Bulgaria? Anyone under the age of 40 isn't really going to get this.
Not even in the Wombles' hometown.
I haven't heard of the Wombles, to be fair, no.
Are you aware that a climate conference is happening?
No.
I think it's definitely something that we should focus on, climate change, for sure, because we can all feel it and the impact of it. But I've never heard of Wombles.
While nobody would dare question the Wombles' litter-picking skills, not everyone's convinced they're quite up to leading the climate conversation. Extinction Rebellion's rush-hour blockade of the M25 on Monday demonstrated just how far some protesters are prepared to go. For activists like this, the government initiative is a joke.
I think it's very important that all of us collectively look upon the mascots as the distraction they're supposed to be and carry on holding government's feet to the fire and insisting they actually make progress on measurable things that we can judge them by.
Well done, Orinoco.
In a Sky and YouGov poll from earlier this year, 84% of those polled were unclear about what COP26 meant. To those that care about climate change, the government's messaging is a mess even the Wombles might struggle to clean up.
It's been a very tiring morning.
Katie Spencer, Sky News.
Now, yesterday we brought you a special report on one of Africa's most forested countries, Gabon, and calls on the international community to help with the cost of conservation there. Well, today we can bring you the news of a $100 million commitment to protect areas in Africa.
Governments across Africa are literally desperate to be part of the global solution to this climate crisis. So we as African Parks, in the course of last year, went through an analysis of all the important protected areas, and we believe that there are 161 across the continent that are absolutely essential to conserving the continent's biodiversity. These landscapes are large landscapes and they are intact ones, and if they're not intact, we are responsible for restoring wildlife so that it is intact And that plays an incredibly important role in terms of maintaining biodiversity, in terms of climate mitigation, but equally importantly, in making sure that the livelihoods of local people are also sustained. There are literally tens, hundreds of thousands of people that live off these systems that are entirely dependent on their survival. And therefore, if they are not looked after, then it's something where those very people perish as well. What's so clear with this climate crisis, equally important to the financing, is making sure that there are actors on the ground that can be able to take the actions that are necessary to be able to revert it. Because if it's only going to be about talking, and if it's only going to be about money, and it's not about action on the ground, then it's something where we're not going to solve the problem.
Well, don't go away, because coming up after the break, we're going to be joined by Fatima Ibrahim, co-founder of Green New Deal UK, and Bob Ward from the Grantham Research Institute on climate change and the environment. And we'll be discussing the role of fossil fuels, plus what is an effective climate change emergency marketing campaign.
Basically, this guy named Drew, we didn't know each other, but he had a TikTok account and he was passing by these two girls in the park, basically talking poorly about me and basically saying that they wanted to plan a party on a weekend that I was out of town so that they didn't have to invite me in the first place. And from that, he posted a video, and that video got about 16 million views or so. And it seemed like everyone and their mother found out about it and knew about it. And it eventually got back to me. I saw it, and we met up the next day and talked about it and basically confirmed that it was me. Overnight, I got around 10,000 messages online, and every single person was like, you know what, forget your old friends. I would love to be your friend. I would love to meet up with you. And people from New York, where I live, and from just everywhere in the world was messaging me this. And so I was like, why don't we all just come together if we want the same thing and we want to meet each other? And from that, we all met up in one place. And now we've been doing it ever since. And I do all around the United States, and hopefully soon I'll be international. I think that's the best part about all of this, was that, you know, your mental health can decline so much on social media, that this was an in-person, real life thing that people can attend and kind of get offline and meet people in real life versus just that whole social media world. And that's how this kind of escalated my mental health and a lot of others. That, you know, the last meetup in New York, we had around 700 people. And that was the most crazy. I mean, the fact that I could just post something like that and that many people show up, and now I'm traveling around the country and the world hosting these meetups for people, is just absolutely incredible. And I love to see people meet others that, you know, months later down the road, they're sending me photos and videos of them going on trips with those people. And I just think that's so awesome that they would have never probably crossed paths with them in the first place.
It's estimated that around 70% of our coastlines are experiencing increased erosion. We start with a steel structure that we put into the seafloor. We then pass a very small electrical current between what we call an anode and the cathode, and the structure itself is the cathode.
Did you know if more of us walked, rode bikes and scooted to school, we would make a big difference to the air pollution around our school? Yeah, like us.
Wednesday is set to be a better day, although it will be rather cloudy first thing. Overnight low cloud and fog will lift to leave a largely dry day with warm sunny spells. There will be a few showers around, mainly for parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland, Ireland and the east coast of England. Taking a look at the daily air quality index, where levels of air pollution are bandied from 1 being low to 10 being very high, low levels of air pollution are expected to continue on Wednesday and through the week.
The Air Quality Report, sponsored by Philips Air Purifiers.
Hello and welcome back to the Daily Climate Show on Sky News. Well, earlier in the programme, we were discussing the countries committed to reducing new coal power construction, as well as Norway's election, which was largely run on climate change issues. So the question is there a role for fossil fuels beyond 2050? Well, I'm joined now by Fatima Ibrahim, co-founder of the Green New Deal UK, and Bob Ward from the Grantham Research Institute on Climate Change and the Environment. Good to see both of you. Fatima, coming to you first. Do you think there will still be demand for fossil fuels in 30 years?
I mean, absolutely not. If we're even remotely interested in avoiding climate disaster and ensuring a future that is not just livable, but promises opportunity to thrive, then there needs to be no role for oil and gas and fossil fuels beyond 2050. And waiting until 2050 is even a gamble. The oil and gas industry are betting on and wanting us to bet our future on unproven technologies of carbon capture and storage so that they can stay in business. But the science is clear. We need to untether the global economy from fossil fuels, and we can transition in a way that's just, that provides security for communities who are dependent on these industries. But we can only do that if we start transitioning now and offer an opportunity that delivers new green jobs for these communities.
And what about you, Bob? Do you think that that pace of transition needs to be quicker?
It certainly needs to be quicker, but the International Energy Agency earlier this year was very clear. If we want to get to net zero emissions of greenhouse gases by the middle of the century, there should be no new development of coal, oil and gas. And that's right across the world, because the reserves we already have are already more than we can afford to burn if we want to get to that 2050 target. So every country, including the UK, should not be exploring for more oil, coal and gas. And it's unfortunate that the UK government has still said that it wants exploration to continue in the North Sea.
Yeah, you're quite right to bring up the IEA there. And let's just look at that quote. The executive director of IEA has said if governments are serious about the climate crisis, there can be no new investments in oil, gas and coal from now. And that's a key distinction, isn't it, Fatima? It's one thing using what you've already got. It's another thing pouring money into new fossil fuel.
I mean, absolutely. And I think that's where we see the hypocrisy of governments who are telling us that we need to take individual action, that the climate crisis is real. And at the same time, we have the UK government who's hosting a UN climate conference, one of the most important international conference on climate, and is at the same time exploring new oil in the North Sea, opening new coal mines in Cumbria. That just doesn't make sense to anybody. And I think that's something I think we're all concerned about, and is creating a lot of anxiety for people, because we just see that their words and their action is not matching.
All right, well, you mentioned the UK government there, of course, hosting COP26 there, as you were saying, Fatima. And it's worth pointing out the government's stance. A government spokesman has said we will continue to need oil and gas in the coming years, as it is still vital to the production of many everyday essentials. Bob, what do you think? Do you think that's damaging to our credibility as host of COP26 when we say that oil and gas and coal is still vital to our everyday needs?
Well, it's clear that we're not going to stop using fossil fuels overnight, so it will be a reduction over time. But the problem that the government has is that it's basically saying, do as we say, not as we do. If it wants other countries to commit to net zero by 2050, which it's quite rightly doing ahead of COP26, then it needs to lead by example. By allowing exploration to continue, it risks contributing to an oversupply of fossil fuels, which will depress the price and make it more difficult to replace fossil fuels. It also means a lot of people are going to lose money, because my bet is we are going to get to net zero by 2050. And a lot of people who are betting on us missing that target are going to lose money by investing in fossil fuels. It's a bad bet to make.
Yeah, you snooze, you lose, I suppose. And Fatima, what do you think? Do you think the UK can be successful in persuading other countries to stick to commitments when we're still considering investments of our own? Just briefly.
I mean, no, I don't think so. And it's not just new investments and new exploration. The government is propping up the fossil fuel industry. We subsidize the fossil fuel industry 10.5 billion every year, the highest rate of subsidies in all of Europe. So I don't know how this government can call itself a leader when it's backing up the fossil fuel industry and really getting in the way from us transitioning into a green economy.
All right there. Well, as we get closer, of course, to COP26, we are seeing more campaigns to encourage people to do their bit from the government and companies, and not least, as we brought you earlier, the Wombles. So how do you market the fight against climate change? Bob, what do you think of campaigns like that from the Wombles? Do you think that the public will take to that, or might they feel a bit patronised?
Well, I think there might be some children who are attracted by it. But for adults, this is really about them understanding that they can do their own bit, but they also have to play their part in the political process. The most important single thing that any person can do is write to their MP or local councillor and say, what are you doing to tackle climate change? It is putting pressure on governments and on policymakers to make the changes in policies that is most important. It cannot be done just by voluntary action by individual consumers.
Yeah, it's a key point, isn't it, Fatima? I mean, you sometimes wonder, is it the public that needs educating, or does the government or the governments around the world need to be clearer what their policies and strategies are?
I mean, I could not agree more with Bob. I'm sending you a virtual high five. That is the single most important thing people can be doing, because the truth is, in our country, most people understand climate change. The public is unanimous in their agreement that there needs to be further action and government-led action on climate change. It isn't the public. It's clear that we'll have to change the way that we live over the next 30 years. But most of the action, the majority of the action, needs to be coming from governments to be leading. We can't be expecting individual choices to make up the difference on climate change. The Wombles is a great example. I was too young. In the 70s, they were educating people on individual action to protect the environment. It's ironic to me that they would be wheeled out 50 years later when the government is still investing in new coal and new oil to tell people about individual action. Individual action is not going to close the gap on climate action. It needs to be government-led.
Yeah, and there's an interesting statistic, isn't there, Bob, that if you look at people's intentions to do things, most people intend to do things that are good for the environment, but actually the number of people who do them, it really drops off. So there's something to address, isn't there, but in that movement from the intention to the action.
The majority of people clearly want to do the right thing, but quite often what's holding them back is either that they think that they're being asked to do an unfair amount, or they're just finding it very difficult. And rather than bringing back to life the Wombles, which I'm very happy about, I remember them from the first time around, frankly, the government should have speeded up the publication of its net zero strategy and the strategy that the Treasury is supposed to be looking at, the net zero review, for how you help families and households make the transition, how they can afford to buy a new electric car and run it, how they can afford to replace their gas central heating with low carbon alternatives. That's what the government must do. It's going to be difficult, but that is what it must focus on instead of bringing back to life the Wombles, I'm afraid.
A lot of shade there for the Wombles. I'm not sure whether it's appropriate that I was planning to finish our discussion now with a quote from who else but Great Uncle Bulgaria. If we will behave like Wombles, we can make a difference to the health of our country and our planet. So we all know what we need to do, don't we? Fatima Ibrahim, Bob Ward, thank you very much for your time tonight. Well, that's everything from us for today. Joining me on the show tomorrow to discuss all of those big climate issues will be the founder and managing director of Seahorse International, Isabella Gornall, and member of the Committee on Climate Change, Dame Julia King. But do stay tuned for now. Coming up on Sky News tonight with Dermot. We'll have more on what can be expected from the Prime Minister's COVID winter plan after the UK's chief medical officers have recommended vaccines for teenagers. But for now, thanks for watching. See you tomorrow night.